All right, we'll get started as people filter in, but really excited to be here today. My name's Anthony. I'm with Win the Era, Mayor Pete's organization is so excited to pull this event together with the amazing teams of our candidates here today. We're so excited to support the work that's going on in Texas and raise awareness and bring in some resources for these brilliant candidates that are doing such amazing work. Today, we're gonna have time for Q&A, so please feel free to use the function down below. Submit some questions if you have them for the candidates. But first, I'm just going to kick it off and turn it over to Mayor Pete.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. I know you're getting a lot of invites, and we're in that really intense period leading into the closing part of voting season. I'm calling it voting season, not election day, because it's underway in so many places around the country. And we're so excited about the potential for big wins in Texas, and really excited. If you already know the fantastic candidates here, you know that we're in for a great conversation. If you're just getting to know them, by the end of our time together, you'll see why I'm so energized and think it's so important to support them. We have Colin Allred, a ringleader of what are called the frontline freshmen, members of Congress who are in these crucial districts, who really, I think, have the instincts and the vocabulary that's going to be so vitally important for us to be able to continue to succeed and govern, and is already a generational leader in a House caucus that has been the engine of good policy. We've got Gina Ortiz-Jones, who will be joining Colin in Congress, somebody who came achingly close to flipping her district in the 2018 election, basically scared her opponent out of the race, and is now poised to deliver a resounding win, somebody who served this country under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and exemplifies the best of what we have to offer. Candace Valenzuela, who, like my mother, is from an El Paso military family, somebody who is also going to make a terrific member of Congress, somebody who has already made history, the first Latina and first African-American woman to serve the school board, where she has been such a champion for opportunity and education where she lives, and is going to bring that now in the 24th congressional district, one that we wouldn't have thought would be as competitive as she has made it. And then in addition to these three fantastic candidates for federal office, with Akila Basie, who's running for the state house, a state house that is tantalizingly close to flipping, helping us prove that there's no such thing as a permanently red state. It would be a shockwave that would be felt, I think, throughout the country, and she is at the forefront of delivering it. She'll share more about her experience, including on this day that we're seeing such heartbreaking news about the extent of family separation that this administration still hasn't sorted out. Her work as a pro bono immigration attorney for children seeking asylum in the U.S. borders, exactly the kind of person who we need to be speaking out for the voiceless and speaking out for all of those she will be serving from Austin. So this is an amazing lineup. It fills my jets. If you're like me, we've had long days, whether you're out on the trail in person, as I've been in some of the recent campaign stops, or having one of these back-to-back Zoom days. We need energy, and I get it from the amazing talent and the amazing compassion of these wonderful candidates. So without further ado, let me turn it over to our first of the candidates to speak. Congressman Allred, how's it going? And share with everybody why you stepped up to run and what you're getting done in Washington right now.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Thanks so much, Pete, for doing this. You're just the best. And, you know, we really appreciate you taking an interest in Texas. Now, I got to be honest, I think you're a little bit jumping on the bandwagon because we're already just moving ahead, but I'm just kidding. But, you know, it's such a great time for us, such a great election for us. And, you know, when you came to Dallas back in March, and we had that really special night with basically the entire, you know, field in many ways coming together to get behind Vice President Biden. I think that was the beginning of where we are now, which I think is 2 weeks away from calling him President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. And it's going to be in large part because of the work that you've done. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate you. I know so many of the folks who I work with and who worked to help me get elected and stay elected are big fans of yours. You have a lot of folks here in Dallas who love you. So thanks for doing this. And of course, I have to thank Sharon Young, the indomitable Sharon Young, for doing this, for everything she does. Sharon, you know, I say this all the time, but when the story of this era is written and we talk about how we came back as a country, as a state here in Texas, it's not going to be, candidates like me. It's going to be folks like you who decided that you were going to take your own democracy into your hands and really make something happen. And you have, and you are. And I'm just in awe of all you do, and want to thank you so much. And I'm happy to be here with our great candidates who are running across this state. I was born and raised here in Texas. I was raised here by a single mother. I can tell you, it's been a long time since we've had this kind of energy, and I think it's time. Texas has been a state that has kind of been a sleeping giant in many ways. We've had did not vote or did not vote is always the one who would win every single election that we have. We've been 48, 49, dead last in voter turnout in many elections. And that has been changing in recent years. And we are already seeing from the early vote totals that we're going to have incredible turnout in this election. And it's not going to be accidental. It's not going to be just happening on its own. It's happening because of campaigns that are working extremely hard, even during a pandemic, and great candidates like we have here today. And so I'll just say this, I truly believe this. I don't think this is an election about right versus left. I think this is an election about right versus wrong, and that there is so much on the ballot that extends even beyond the truly, truly deeply important policy discussions that we're going to have, and the desperately needed reaction to this pandemic, and to get us out of the public health crisis and the economic crisis that we're in. But fundamentally, our democracy is on the ballot. And I'm in Congress. I'm a member of the Congressional Black Caucus. And a few months ago, we lost one of our giants in John Lewis. And before he passed, Mr. Lewis told us that he thought this was the most important election in American history. And Mr. Lewis had seen a few elections, and he'd seen a few critical moments in American history. And for him to say that, I think, tells you everything you need to know about how important this election is, how important it is that we spend these last 2 weeks doing everything we possibly can. So it's been an honor for me to serve in Congress, in the district, in the area where I grew up. My mom was a public school teacher. I went to public schools here. We don't pay our teachers enough, so it wasn't always easy, but I relied on my community, and that has informed how I've tried to serve in Congress and how we've tried to get things done. But we know that we have a lot of work to do, and we need to send some great help to Washington, and that's why I'm happy to be joined, who I'll turn it over to next, by Gina Ortiz-Jones, who I think is, Gina's a friend of mine. We've been friends now for some time, but she is just a remarkable, remarkable public servant. 12 years in the Air Force. She's got an incredible story that I'm sure she can tell better than I can. But fundamentally, she's just someone who really cares about this country, both from her service and now having run in 2018. And as you mentioned, coming so close, and now running again in 2020. And I think she's going to certainly win and represent the 23rd District. We need her. She's going to add so much to not only the Texas delegation, but to our caucus as a whole. And Gina, I just can't wait to call you Congresswoman-elect. So I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Colin. And Mayor Pete, thank you for bringing this event together. In the military, you learn very early on that your number one job as a leader is to develop more leaders. And so I've always been very thankful for your leadership, for your mentorship, for your example. This campaign has not been easy. The anti-LGBTQ attacks, and one of the first calls I got was from Mayor Pete, and my partner Anna got one from Chasten, and I just always really appreciated you reaching out and checking on us at a personal level, Pete. So thank you. Of course, thank you, Sharon. Sharon's always behind the scenes, making things happen and making sure that it's one thing to run, but if you don't have the resources to get your message out and make sure people can hear the contrast between yourself and your opponent's vision, it makes it very difficult. So I want to thank Sharon for her continued leadership, especially in this home stretch, and thank you all for joining us and helping us make sure that we get our country back on the right track. I know something about tight races, and I know something about it ain't over till it's over, right? 926 votes was the margin when I ran in 2018. And I didn't run against Louis Gohmert, right? I ran against Will Hurd, the most formidable Republican in the House. And so this is now an open seat in a district that Hillary won. But to give you an idea of how competitive this seat is, the incumbent has won 3 times and never broken 50%. So we're up against 2.6 million in attack ads, homophobic attack ads, to be clear. And another million was just dropped on us for the last 2 weeks of this race. So that last one is also pretty homophobic. We can't take anything for granted. Colin mentioned our democracy is on the ballot, but it is clear just in how they have, the types of things that they were talking about during this pandemic, as families are literally trying to put food on the table, trying to get their kids back in the classroom. For them to resort to these gutter politics just shows you just how desperate they are and how it's so important that we get our country back on the right track. I'm an Air Force veteran, Iraq War veteran, worked in national security for almost 15 years, protecting our economic and our national security. So I've seen firsthand the importance of American leadership, its indispensability, really. But I'm also first generation American, raised by a single mom, reduced lunch, subsidized housing, critical investments that allowed me to earn an ROTC scholarship that allowed me to get an education. So having lived the American dream, having seen the importance of American leadership, I am committed to making sure that I do my part to fight for, protect the opportunities that allowed me to grow up healthy, get an education, and serve our country. I want to thank you all for being a part of making sure that we flip Texas blue, and thanks so much for your continued support. I am now very honored to introduce Candace, who I look forward to serving with. She's a longtime public servant, and she brings a wealth of experience, or lived experience, or professional experience that I know will make sure that Dallas-Fort Worth area is also well served. So over to you, Candace.
Thank you so much, Gina. And it doesn't matter how many times I hear you talk about how close you got. I just wince every single time. And I am looking forward to celebrating with you in, 12 days and some hours. It's happening. Thank you again, Sharon, for all the work that you've done in my community in particular, because we are both residents of North Texas, and what you're doing to save democracy across the country. It is critical here that we have everybody doing absolutely everything they can. And Mayor Pete, it is just a privilege to get to campaign with you right now. And particularly now I get to be personally privy to more of your famous turns of phrase. I know that you were talking about our future Rep Basie, but I'm going to talk about my district being tantalizingly close to flipping from now until the end of the election. Hello, and thank you all for being here, and thank you for your support of these really critical races. I'm Candace Valenzuela, and I am working hard to be the first ever Black Latina elected in the country, and definitely the first woman and woman of color to be elected to Texas's 24th district. This district, there's just so much at play here. Some folks have called this the quintessential battle of the suburbs, because we have two very different suburban moms locked in a battle here. There's myself. I am the mother of two young sons, one of whom is engaged in virtual kindergarten and is loudly playing some sort of musical instrument as we speak. I am the daughter of two Army veterans, and I am working hard because the opportunities that helped me go from being homeless as a kid, living in a kiddie pool outside of El Paso gas station, to becoming the first in my family to go to college, to becoming the first woman of color on my school board, has been under attack by this administration. And my opponent, who is also a suburban mom, is trying to create the illusion that she is the standard bearer of suburban motherhood. She was also the very first mayor in the country to endorse Donald Trump. She kept a young boy in police custody for bringing a clock to school while also being Muslim. So if you remember Clock Boy, that's what I'm up against here. So we have this suburban, well-educated, majority person of color district, and there is so much at stake for so many of these communities, not just because we're talking about healthcare, not just because we're talking about the very fabric of our democracy, but we're talking about incredibly derisive and divisive rhetoric that put folks in immediate danger. And the Republican Party has been joining in on the fun here. They've thrown something like $6.5 million into this media market. They're superimposing my face over rioting and looting. And I assume it's a person who's trying to jump over a border wall. They didn't really specify or label it, but my face is floating above all of it nonetheless. And they're doing that because I'm winning. I've been posting a pretty consistent lead since I won my primary runoff back in July. And it's narrowed just a bit because we are up against that media maelstrom. We're up against these folks that are making up some terrible things. In fact, I saw some folks talking about the rhetoric in the chat, but we're keeping up that voter contact because that's what it's all about right now. We're calling, we're texting, and we're communicating with ads that show the potential of the future of this country. When we're talking about an incredible slate of candidates like the one we have in Texas, when we're talking about a Biden-Harris administration, we're talking about what we can be. And I, again, am so grateful for your contribution to our ability to communicate that better vision. And speaking of a better vision, the only way that any of this remains possible is if we flip the Texas House. Texas's House controls redistricting here. And right after the census, we're going to have a brand new session. And so what happens in this election will affect electoral politics that come from Texas for the next 10 years. And if you think 3.5 years was a long time, you understand what's at stake here for the state and this country. And it's not just about having a blue seat filled. It's about having great people to do that, people who have the community first in mind. And it is my pleasure to introduce somebody who's exactly like that. Akila Basie is running for Texas House District 138, and she's been doing some amazing things in her community. She's serving as a pro bono immigration attorney for children seeking asylum in the United States. I mean, if there is anything that was an antithesis to what we are seeing in this administration, it's somebody who's here saving children who desperately need it. So Akila, thank you so much for stepping up to serve our communities and to turn Texas' State House blue.
Thank you so much. And it is truly an honor to be running in Texas with all of you all and to have the support of Mayor P and Sharon. Thank you guys. I want to say down here in West Houston, and I echo many of the sentiments that we're hearing. He said one is that we now see that Texas is not only in play, but Texas is tired. Texas is tired of the negative rhetoric that we're hearing, and Texas is tired of being labeled as one type of person in this state. And we see that by just the amazing numbers of people that are coming out to vote. And, I'm really excited because I went out there the first day of early vote to the polls, and I watched the lines. I watched people get in line with their lawn chairs and their books and their newspapers and their breakfast because they were going to stay there no matter what. And what was even more exciting was when I was there running for this state house seat, which the Democrats missed flipping by only 47 votes, was the people who ran up to me and said thank you. The people who wanted just those photos and said, we have to do this. Thank you for what you've been doing in our community. And, and I feel like that's part of what's really been exciting about down here in 138 is that when I got into this race, I didn't get into this race and say, for positions of power. What I got into was the work that I had been doing in the community. I started my career off as a prosecutor here in Harris County. Then I started doing defense and discrimination work. But what I saw so often was that what we had happening in our courtrooms was birth from issues in our communities. That was a lack of education and lack of employment, fair employment opportunities. And, that led me to getting my community and saying, you know what, I'm going to make sure that I use my privilege in service of others, regardless of how and where, but wherever I'm needed, I'm going to do that. And I started teaching ESL and I started teaching adult literacy. And around this time, that's when President Trump decided to declare war on our immigrants and our borders and close down the airports. And I remember when we saw that on the news, and I remember getting in my car and the ACLU called for attorneys to come down to Bush Intercontinental Airport to file cases on the floor of the airport. And so, I mean, just think about how how insane that actually is if you're calling for lawyers, any lawyer to come down and help us, right? So, and I thought about it, I said, I've never done immigration law a day in my life, but you know what, I do have a law degree, and if you'll teach me how to do it, I'll do it. And so I remember going down there, and I remember them saying, you know what, it's a parking lot, you're not gonna make it. So I said, okay. So I remember coming back and saying, but you know what? There has never been a court case that I've seen that has began or ended on an airport floor anywhere. So we're coming home and I started linking up with organizations and I said, listen, I've never done immigration law a day in my life, but if you will teach me, I will use the privilege that I have and the knowledge that I have to make sure that that I can help and fight. And so that's what really got me into the fight of fighting for her children seeking asylum. And then, you get to meet these families, and I don't speak Spanish. Everybody said, no, you speak Spanish. I don't. But just listening through interpretations, just feeling that human connection that you have, and just these families and listening how you got here, and all your professionalism. There's no way your heart is just not going to sink. There's no way you're going to keep it dry because coming from a single parent household and a mom who's an educator, I saw how hard she worked. And then you see people who want that same thing and are working twice as hard, 3 times as hard as my hardworking mom did, just for a shot at it. And I said, you know what? There's no way that we can continue on this path the way that we're doing. We need to make sure that we have a government that, as already one, it has the availability to serve the people. It is just not a priority to do so. And it is time that we make sure that we have leaders in office who put people as their priority, who put our children, our futures as a priority, and not just power and finances as a priority. And so that's what pushed me to run. And that is what has led me for the last 20 months to continue this race. And you know what? And I think that's what's going to bring us all that victory on November 3rd, is that people seeing themselves, people seeing people who are ready to fight for people, take the stage and take the forefront, and lead this country and lead the state. And for me, flip the Texas house.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Akila, and thank you so much, everybody. We have just a few more minutes with the mayor, and then we're going to continue with Q&A. But Mayor, I think there's a great question, and I think before you jump, I'd love you to address this, that I think would be powerful. But Andrea submitted a question saying, as a young person that recently got involved in politics, political polarization is all I've ever known. How do you find common ground with our neighbors today in a world where even basic facts are politicized and debated?
Yeah, it's a great question, and this is why I find myself going into places like Fox News at every opportunity. Often we find that others who vote differently or politically behave differently than we do are actually working from a completely different set of facts, or so-called facts. They're in a different reality. And the more we can break down the walls between our realities, the more we can make sure people hear our message, the better we're going to do, not just politically, but I think the better we're going to do in our communities and in our country. We're not going to win everybody over. That's a given. But there are so many people who come to this process in good faith, get bad information, but are open to another better way if we can reach them with the right kind of leadership. It's part of why I think the 4 people on this call are the kinds of leaders who are going to be so important to our country making progress. They're running in competitive districts where you don't have the luxury of just repeating yourself or preaching to the choir all the time. You have to engage others. You have to persuade others to see things from your point of view, or just as importantly, persuade them to support you, even if they know you're not always going to see things from the same point of view, which is a huge part of how we have that overlapping consensus that gets great leaders elected and helps us navigate through the toughest situations we face. I've been thinking and writing a lot about the subject of trust lately. The issues that we face as a country and as humanity can't be solved without greater cooperation, which can't happen without greater trust, which doesn't happen without people showing greater regard for each other. And that's where that humanity is so important, that we see on display in the great leaders that we're trying to elect and re-elect today. So it's very much a question that I think should be on all of our minds, but it's also something we have a chance to do right now, not just by making sure that we win, but in how we win. And winning the right way is a big step toward that.
Thank you so much, Mayor. And I know you have to run now, but we're going to continue the party without you.
All right. Well, I'm sorry to have to step away, but I'm so glad that everyone on this call has stepped up to contribute. Look, it is, I know it's very close to Election Day, or as I call it, the end of voting season, but it still matters to make sure that we get the financial resources available for these candidates to be able to win. As you can see just from hearing from them just now, the more voters hear what they have to say, the more they're going to get the support that is going to make it possible to win. So please take a moment, look at the links that are going up in the chat box, support each of these candidates with as much as you can financially, and help spread the word. Help people volunteer, learn about the importance of these races. Make sure that if there's ever even one vote on the table, that we don't let it go by without reaching out to that voter and encouraging them to vote. I can't wait. I can't wait for what it's going to be like when we return Colin Allred to Congress, when Texans send Gina Ortiz-Jones and Candace Valenzuela to join them on Capitol Hill, and when Akila Basie is part of a wave transforming what's possible in the state of Texas, taking her seat in the legislature. It is going to be a good day for this country, and you're helping bring that good day apart. So Sharon, thanks to you, everybody on this host committee, and most importantly to everybody joining this event. Please go out there and tell some friends why you're as inspired as I am to support these great candidates. And let's set ourselves up to where we're celebrating good news out of Texas just a couple weeks from now.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks so much, Mayor. We're going to continue the party because we got some questions that are coming in. And I think there's a great question that just came in from Scott Graybo, who said, for the candidates, Congress seems to have stopped legislating and have deferred their voice to leadership. What should be done to get back to normal in legislating and debating and being in committees? So Colin, why don't we start with you?
Well, you know, we've passed a lot of good legislation in the House. In fact, we've sent hundreds of bipartisan bills out of the House to the Senate that have just died there in, you know, what Mitch McConnell likes to call his graveyard. And so this has been a bad time for Congress. There's no doubt about it. We have not had enough legislation passing, and we have not been able to respond nimbly enough, I think, to this crisis. I will say that we, you know, passed about $4 trillion worth of aid earlier this year on a unanimous basis. That was for us, you know, an aberration, and we're seeing, you know, now some of the discussions that are still going on. And you know, I think everyone on this call is of the mindset that, you know, we really need to have a deal to get us through the end of the year. We're heading into what's going to be a worse fall and winter with COVID, unfortunately. That's what all the experts are telling us. We're seeing the numbers rise here in Dallas, certainly. And of course, it's also the holiday season, and folks are going to want to, you know, if they can, gather and certainly try and celebrate. But it's hard to celebrate when the job that you have has been entirely eliminated because of a pandemic, and there's no support for you, even if you're on unemployment insurance. And so we have to do a lot of things to help folks get through this period. I'm still fairly optimistic that we're going to be able to do that. But once we get through this, it's certainly true that in the next Congress, we need to have major reforms of the way Congress conducts itself and try and make sure that we do have, as much as possible, legislation going through our committees, getting a full airing, having input from both sides. These are things that I believe in strongly, just in terms of our democracy, so that, as I do think that good ideas don't come with a, you know, Democratic or Republican label on them. There are certainly good ideas, and I have a lot of colleagues who I speak with who there's a lot of common ground that we can find. But you know, obviously, we are in an election season. Everything's very political right now. But I think that we're going to rise to this moment as a country, and that our leaders will rise to it as well. And you know, but I agree that certainly in the next Congress, we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, thank you so much, Colin. And speaking of the next Congress, Candace or Gina, how do you want to touch on how you plan to legislate once you get there?
Sure. You know, I will start, I'll approach it the way I've approached my entire life in public service, which is, what have we been asked to do in the interest of the country? How do we build a team to get it done? How do we hold ourselves accountable if we fall short of that? You know, that's a public servant's mindset. That's a public servant's skill set. And so many of the issues facing our country, whether it be of healthcare, you know, immigration policies, an economy that doesn't leave people behind, I think that's exactly the lens that you need. I think this issue, though, actually gets back to why it's so important. Not only do we elect different kinds of people to Congress, right? People that have this very basic understanding of to whom they should hold themselves accountable, but also why it's so important we flip the state house. Because, so many folks, they are fine just kind of relegating this because they don't feel they don't fear losing anything. They don't feel they're drawn in these seats that were drawn to be safely red or safely blue, and they don't feel the consequences of doing that, of acting that way. And so I think, one, taking big money out of politics, drawing fairer lines, so we actually have people that are representative of the districts that they are going to represent, as well as sending the right kinds of people to Congress, to Austin, is key to fixing this. Because, I mean, as Colin just mentioned, the House has done a lot of good work, but unfortunately, based on the power of special interests, based on these folks that are so entrenched and not really accountable, nor do they feel any type of sympathy, it sounds or seems like, or empathy for those that are really suffering this time. There's really so much, it's quite limited what you can do if you don't have the right kinds of leaders in the room, at the table, making decisions in the interest of working people.
And in that sense, I come from a similar lens. We have so many people that are representing Texas that aren't truly representing Texas, that aren't truly representing the values of the people here who care about their communities, who care about the fact that their neighbor may not be able to keep a roof over their head or put food on the table, that care about people in other neighborhoods that may not necessarily have the education that they need. And they want to see the economic opportunity available to them. And so when I go to DC, it's going to be working with those families in mind, just as I worked with families in mind as a local elected official. We have folks here who've never engaged in this process before this year, suddenly making phone calls, suddenly shooting text messages, writing postcards. They're talking to their family members about politics in a way that they've never done so before, because this is a topic they shy away from. They are Republicans organizing their families to vote for Joe Biden. I mean, there is something really electric about it. And there is so much of this process that has to be communal. It has to be bringing in different types of folks so that you can not just get elected, but to govern appropriately. And just as Gina said, that the strength of what Biden can do depends on the strength of the entire slate being able to work together to do that. And for the first time in a very long time, I'm really seeing that in Texas, and it's really exciting.
That's amazing. It gives me chills to hear all the amazing things that are happening in Texas. And I think that ties into a question that came in, I think, from an anonymous attendee, but I'm going to say it's a high school student, because they said, what advice could you give to a high school students getting involved in working on campaigns for the first time this election? What do we think the future of political work looks like? Akilah, do you want to take this one first?
I would love to take that one. I think that, to whoever you may be, I think now is the perfect time for you to jump aboard, because so many people, like Candace was saying, is that we're just seeing now people for the first time who are organizing and getting involved in politics. And even me, I come from more of a community service background than I do a political background. But when we look at it, so much of the work is exactly the same. And the goals are the same, and that it's about making sure that you're able to serve your community. So I would say the first way to do it is to look around at some of your candidates, some of your local candidates, and find someone who you want to connect with and tell them you're ready to volunteer. Because I'm pretty sure that all of us, are still making phone calls. I know we're at least doing lit drops, if not block walking. We are looking at people to go out to the polls and work. Even your local party, your county party, is doing the same thing at this point. And honestly, it's one of those things, like I said, from even my community services, like, just wherever it is, if you'll train me how to do it, asking, I'll do it. And just really signing up, it's that simple. And also the really cool things that you can do now is, because we're so virtual, is you can honestly volunteer for a candidate in a different state across this country, whomever it may be. My recommendation is always, to make sure you're hitting a down ballot candidate, someone who might not always get that support. And that includes, I mean, I know Biden needs the help. He definitely needs it in Texas, but, it's going to be felt a lot more strongly for congressional seats and House seats and things of that sort. And so that's what I would say is just really just get in there, ask them, and then just also, if you know the expertise that you have, if you know that you're great on the phones, tell the team that. If you're bilingual, tell the team that. They would absolutely use that. I've had people come to my team and say, hey, we want to write postcards for you in Vietnamese. And we're like, absolutely, let's just get on it and do that. We have to say, I'm bilingual. Can you give us a list of only Spanish speakers in your district? Absolutely. And so we love that we're able to use everyone's own talent. So don't be shy about what your talents are, because I'm sure that all campaigns will be so excited to use them going forward for the next few weeks.
Fantastic. And I love hearing that, like, unique ways that people are kind of campaigning during COVID. I'm curious to hear if any of the other folks have any other interesting stories, because I think there's interesting stories that I hear every day out there.
As soon as I left my primary in early March, I was in a primary runoff. And right about a week out from that, we were getting together our plans. Okay, it's time to knock on doors. It's time to have campaign rallies. It's time to really get into the community and dig in and really engage. And then all of a sudden we weren't. For the first time in my life, I was going to get into South by Southwest. And I wasn't anymore. I was going to be speaking on a panel. We were now looking at engagement that needed to be COVID safe. And this was the great thing about having a lot of Gen Z people working with me and volunteering with me. These digital natives knew exactly what to do as soon as we were looking at turning our engagement around. And I had a lot of old school organizers who were also on the young side, and they're like, okay, there's this part of my life and this part of my life. How do we combine these two things? And so instead of knocking on doors, dividing up turfs that way, we were making sure to call certain areas of our district and get a hold of folks that way. We were organizing Zoom meet and greets. And this is one of the most amazing things about Zoom. It's a great leveler for folks that may not necessarily have hosting spaces. And in particularly, we had one 16-year-old boy, and he held a couple of meet and greets for me with his Nepalese community. And he brought in his high school friends who were old enough to vote, and he brought in the parents of his friends who were not old enough to vote. And we tracked what ended up happening on election day for the runoff in July. And this young man by himself at 16 brought in 60 votes. So there were so many incredible things we've been able to do in this space that we might not have discovered if we weren't forced to be a little bit creative. So I'm sad that we are still dealing with this pandemic, thanks in large part to a terrible Senate majority leader. But I'm so excited about the ways in which we've learned how to connect with people. And I think that we're going to be able to have some great campaign practices going forward.
Fantastic. Representative Allred, did you have a?
No, I mean, I think this is, in many ways, this is young people's time. I mean, they're much better online than we are. So, and they're savvy. And I listen, we've got so many young people who've gotten involved in our campaign. I think the fundamental thing that we try and do, and I'm sure Gina and Candace and Akila do the same thing, is make sure there's no barriers. You shouldn't feel like you have to have some prior experience of some kind or be in politics or know somebody. It's your democracy. If you want to change it, do it. That's just the way it works. It's not a spectator sport. You can get involved. Campaigns will put you to work, as Candace said, and particularly for young people, this is your moment. Listen, you're much better digitally than anybody else. So, organize and make that change you want to see. You wouldn't let your grandparents pick the show you're going to watch for the next 4 years. Don't let them pick your president. So I mean, and I'm confident that young people understand that. And every time I speak with young people here in Dallas and North Texas, they're fired up. They're paying attention. They know what's going on. this is the most diverse, most informed, least biased generation in American history, and I have a lot of confidence in them.
Gina?
Sure. To that young high school student, I would just say, look, find somebody who's going to fight for you and fight for your community, and find that person who reflects your values, and then help them go fight for your community, right? That's what this is about. And I would absolutely echo Akila's comments. I would say, if you're not a woman running for office, hopefully you are a woman helping a woman run for office, right? We need our voices at the table. We're seeing too often during just this administration, but over history, what it means for our communities if we're not at the table. So, pick a race and make sure that that you put everything out there so we can get our country back on the right track.
Amazing. The only thing I will add is that high school students and young people can also raise money. We had a bundler on the P campaign that raised $75,000 through the Facebook page. It was amazing. And so if you're a high school student, you can also raise money, which these candidates need. Thank you all so much. I'm going to turn it over to Sharon to close us out for today. But this has been so exciting, and I'm so grateful y'all took the time. I know we had 12 and a half days left, so I'm counting down the hours. But Sharon, why don't you take us home?
Thank you. And thank all of you. Thank you for running again, Gina. Thank you, Candace, for fighting through a really tough runoff. And always thank you, Rep. Paul Red. There is some thinking out there that either all the money's raised, we're done, Akila's numbers look good, or whatever the case may be. I have been in close contact with all of the campaigns and other campaigns, and as mentioned, the attacks that I am seeing come into my home, either TV or mail, that are complete lies. The attacks against Colin are jaw-dropping. It seems like not politics as usual. It's really terrible. And Colin has a self-funder who just put in 1.9 million. Gina mentioned that some Republican money has come in, $1 million for her this last 10-day stretch. I think Candace has had $6.5 million come in to fight her. They need funding. All of their campaigns have dropped their links in the chat box. I want to thank everyone for their generosity today, but if you can do more, do more. I used to think, where can you actually spend it at this point? But in the COVID era, TV and digital is what we have. Speaking of young people, Colin had the most robust field program with college interns when he was elected in 2018. In fact, I still get calls, can you hook me up with Colin's campaign? And, we don't have that anymore. TV is expensive. Dallas and Texas TV is expensive. So be generous, give more if you can. And just want to thank everyone who joined us today, but a really huge thanks to Mayor Pete for elevating and endorsing our fabulous, amazing Texas candidates that I'm so lucky that I get to live with. Thanks.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you so much, Sharon.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone, have a great night.